There's an old proverb that says, home is where the heart is. But when someone in the family or among allies sees home differently, heartbreak isn't far behind. Join me today as I reveal the tale of the East River Three and their quest for the Pearl. The story begins with April and Donnie frustrated after spending 6 hours listening to Splinter recount the big storm, entirely in vermin speak, making it useless for April's school project. But Raph didn't think it mattered because, according to him, Splinter's storytelling skills weren't exactly top-notch. Donnie hinted at the real consequences of the storm-flooded streets, power outages, and chaos. But Raph insisted that if they were going to tell the story, they had to spice it up with what people really wanted. Fights, monsters, maybe even a heist. And, for fun, Donnie getting eaten. So Raph decided to rewrite the tale, even giving Splinter a better voice, crafting a story about family, home, and the dangers of irresponsibility. In the depths of the East River, a small community thrived around a big, shiny pearl. Among its inhabitants were a goldfish, a seahorse, and a sea eel, 3 creatures who were partners and friends and lived happily in the harmony of their pearl-centered neighborhood, a place they called home. But one night, Superfly and his mutagen machine plunged into the river, and the 3 creatures, along with some anemones, were transformed into mutants. Branded as freaks by their peers, they had no choice but to leave their home. On the surface, they discovered a TV and absorbed human culture through it. The anemones even learned to speak, though their vocabulary was limited to advertisement slogans. The 3 sea creatures, now known as Goldfin, Mustang Sally, and Lee the Eel, became the East River Three. After Superfly's rampage, salvage efforts uncovered the very pearl they had once cherished. Longing to reclaim their home, the East River Three believed that if they could retrieve and return the pearl, they'd be welcomed as heroes. Just as the turtles had found their place in civilization by defeating the Mega Mutant. The Jersey Bite, now recognized as one of the largest pearls in the world, had been placed on display at the National History Museum of New York. But they weren't precisely master criminals, so they sought out Bad Bernie, freshly freed of all charges, to help them pull off the heist. It all started with a big storm. The lair was springing leaks everywhere, and after 3 days of non-stop rain, everyone was suffering from serious cabin fever. Raph, in an attempt to find some peace, tried meditating, but his efforts were quickly disrupted by the sound of drilling echoing through the sewers. Realizing they couldn't stay cooped up any longer, Splinter decided to send everyone out on different tasks. Leo was paired with Pigeon Pete to get some fresh air, Mikey and Genghis were sent to the market, Donnie and Wingnut were tasked with fixing the power, and Raph, along with Scumbug and Ray Fillet, was told to investigate the drilling noise. Raph and his team soon discovered Steven, a worker drilling into the seawall under unusual circumstances. It turned out he was being pressured by some creepy mutants who had promised him $4 million in overtime pay. Before they could get to the bottom of it, they were attacked by mutant sea anemones and couldn't prevent the wall from breaking, leading to flooding of the tunnels. With Steven's help, they managed to defeat the anemones, but their victory was short-lived. The mutants who had given Steven his orders returned, revealing themselves as the East River Three. Mikey and Genghis went to Miss Contry's market, a place they used to steal from, but where they were now welcomed and given things for free. However, things took a twist when Genghis discovered that Miss Contry had a cat, his favorite snack. Unbeknownst to Mikey, Miss Contry was being robbed by the purple dragons. After a few minutes of running into them, Mikey finally realized who they were and what they were up to. The dragons convinced Mikey to drop his weapons, but the situation quickly escalated when Genghis put the cat in his mouth, triggering a fight with Hun, who is determined to save the feline. Just as chaos erupted, the floor suddenly opened, and Lee the Eel appeared. Everyone got trapped inside the store. Lee attacked Mikey to stop him from interfering with their plans to break into the museum. Accused of not taking charge in crucial situations, Mikey realized it was up to him to turn things around, especially with Genghis preoccupied with the cat. Thinking quickly, he fooled Lee into getting out of the water, allowing everyone to escape without getting electrified. But Lee eventually escaped. After seeing a swarm of rats escaping from the storm drains, April suspected the sewers were flooding, and the turtles were in danger. She called Splinter to warn him, but he refused to leave his home. When the call dropped and she couldn't reach the turtles, April decided to go down and get him herself. As Splinter prepared to defend the lair, he was suddenly attacked by Goldfin. The fight was interrupted when April arrived, and she tried to convince Splinter that he didn't need to stay underground. The people on the surface loved them. But Splinter didn't feel the same. He believed he wasn't part of the social life above and had only made connections with other mutants and the rats. Goldfin, who had sharp fins, attacked again, but April managed to trap him in a bucket this time. After moving him into an aquarium, they interrogated him about his motives. They heard loud noises just then, and April rushed to the tunnel to see what was happening. Splinter saved her from the rising floodwaters, but the anemones quickly surrounded them. Goldfin grew desperate, fearing that April would reveal his plan to flood the city and meet with Bad Bernie at the pier. The rats saved Splinter from the currents, who continued to insist that he was their rat king. Splinter then sent the rats to rescue April. In the ensuing battle, the clash between their ideas of home became clear. Goldfin saw home as something to secure, a physical space where he could belong. For Splinter, however, home wasn't just a place. It was the memories, relationships, and bonds he shared with those he cared about. They managed to defeat Goldfin, but he escaped. Fortunately, April already knew where he would be. Donnie and Wingnut were working to restore power when Lee the Eel passed by, causing a cave-in that sent them even deeper into the underground. Down there, they encountered a sewer alligator, which triggered Wingnut's fears that Leatherhead might have found a way to demutate herself. In the darkness, these two typically level-headed characters began feeding off each other's neuroses. With no other choice, they engaged the alligator in a fight, which ended when falling debris took it down. Relieved, they moved on, only to discover that the alligator had survived and was back on their trail. Donnie realized that logic alone wouldn't solve the problem. He needed to tap into his reptilian instincts to connect with Leatherhead. He tried to reason with Leatherhead, asking her not to attack them. But that's when the real Leatherhead appeared. Leatherhead admitted that she had considered demutating after encountering the sewer alligators, but when those stupid things bit her, she got over the idea. Donnie and Wingnut then devised a plan to keep the alligator's mouth open long enough for them to escape. Just as they made it to the other side, another alligator showed up, but Leatherhead quickly flipped it onto its back, temporarily paralyzing it, a trick that often works with alligators. As they made their way out, they crossed paths with Raph, Scumbug, and Ray Fillet, who just found a dynamite time bomb. Leo was struggling to keep Pigeon Pete under control, especially since Pete had thermal vision and could see Lee the Eel, whom he impulsively was trying to follow. Leo dismissed Pete's behavior as erratic, unaware that Pete was actually trying to warn him about Lee's presence. On the surface, Detective Hauser, who had a fear of pigeons due to a traumatic event in his childhood, was pooped on by Pigeon Pete. So far, the only thing keeping his fear in check was the belief that he was bigger than the pigeons. But this incident changed everything. In a panic, he ordered all units, SWAT, helicopters, and even the National Guard to respond. Trying to stay close to Pigeon Pete, Leo ended up at a pump station, where Mustang Sally was preparing to blow up the station and flood the museum along with most of Midtown. Sally had the unusual ability to throw rocks with incredible force and accuracy. Leo and Sally fought fiercely, but Sally's armor was tough. Leo wasn't necessarily trying to stop Sally's plan. His primary focus was on getting Pete back under control. Once again, Leo dismissed Pete's attempts to get his attention, this time not realizing that Pete was trying to warn him about the approaching SWAT team. As the fight intensified, the police surrounded the building, with SWAT teams on site armed with EPF weapons. As they entered the building to catch Pete, Leo and Sally were forced to fend off the SWAT agents. Just as Pete was nearly captured, Leo discovered that Pete could now talk, a surprising development. But there was no time to dwell on it, as Sally was about to blow up the pump station and flood the city. Through these chaotic events, Leonardo learned a valuable lesson. Sometimes it's not about others following his orders, but trusting others' abilities and knowing when to follow their lead to get things done. After escaping the pump station, Pigeon Pete deduced the East River Three's plan to flood the museum, and the disaster unfolded right before their eyes. The East River Three entered the museum through a toilet and successfully stole the pearl. Meanwhile, Donnie and Raph's teams discovered a stash of dynamite underground. Realizing the danger, Raph and Donnie headed to the museum, while Wingnut, Ray, Leatherhead, and Scumbug stayed behind to disarm the bomb, though they lost the instructions to the water. All the turtles and Genghis reunited outside the museum, where a battle ensued. Amidst the chaos, Goldfin found himself alone with the pearl, and that was when it was revealed that Bad Bernie had convinced Goldfin to betray his partners. Bernie promised that if Goldfin brought the pearl back to him, he'd make him king of the sea. The pearl was worth millions, and the temptation was too great for Goldfin to resist, so he betrayed his partners and escaped with the pearl. However, the turtles anticipated his move and tracked him to the pier, where Goldfin had rebranded into Badfin, Bad Bernie's very own mutant. But their confrontation was interrupted by an attack from the Rat King, which turned out to be Splinter's army of rats along with his human ally, April O'Neil. Bad Bernie tried to put the yacht in motion to escape, but the turtles quickly surprised him. Realizing they couldn't disarm the bomb, Ray Fillet took the dynamite out to sea, far away from the mutanimals. After a long fight, the turtles got a confession out of Goldfin, and both Lee and Sally overheard him. Goldfin offered to split the money with them, but they just wanted to be with him. For Sally, home meant being with the people you care about. Knowing it was too late for regrets, Goldfin threw all his enemies off the boat and set it in motion. Suddenly, Ray appeared with the dynamite. The turtles, Sally, Lee, Pete, and Genghis worked together to deliver the dynamite to the boat, blowing it up. As the rain finally stopped, Sally and Lee set off on a small boat to find a new home for themselves. The pearl was returned to its rightful place, with a decoy left at the museum, probably made from Pete's poop. The anemones rescued Bad Bernie and Goldfin survived, ready to cause trouble another day. And that was the story of the pearl. Despite Raph's modifications, April didn't think she'd get a good grade. But was that because the story was too exaggerated? How much of it actually happened? Did the East River Three even exist? Micah Abbey, Shaman Brown Jr., Nicholas Cantu, and Brady Noon brought the turtles to life. Ayo Edebiri voiced April O'Neil, while Jillian Bell gave the voice to Lee the Eel. Natasha Demetriou played Wingnut. Christopher Mintz-Plasse voiced Pigeon Pete, with Timothy Oliphant taking on the role of Goldfin, with Post Malone as Ray Fillet and Danny Trejo as Mustang Sally. Genghis Frog was portrayed by both Ahmad Jackson and Fred Tatasciore, while Carlin James as Hun, Jamila Velasquez played Angel, and Michael Badalucco portrayed Bad Bernie. Rose Byrne also returned as Leatherhead. Splinter was voiced by Brady Noon, though he wasn't credited for it, with only Fred Tatasciore listed as the voice of Splinter in his vermin form. While I understand the intention in Brady voicing Splinter, at times it was a little distracting. It's now confirmed that Ray Fillet only sings variations of his name, like Ray Fillet, Yay Fillet, and OK Fillet, among others. I have a few observations regarding the plot. If Lee the Eel could break through the earth so easily, then did they really need the excavator? I'm not sure I understood how her abilities worked. On another note, though triggered by Lee, Donnie's episode stands on its own as a separate story, as the three alligators weren't connected to the East River Three. There was an interesting twist in this tale regarding Bad Bernie. He gave off strong Rat King vibes in the movie, so seeing him face off against a new Rat King, who's actually a rat, was particularly entertaining. This brought an unexpected yet no-brainer twist to the story. Will there be a real Rat King in the future? Time will tell. Like in the previous tale this season, the turtles were forced to work without their brothers and come out of their comfort zones. Leo had to learn how to follow others, Donnie had to take a leap of faith, Mikey had to take charge of situations, and Raph was the only one who could use words to solve a situation, in a story where no one could speak English but him. On a more philosophical level, this story was rooted in the home theme. Goldfin's view of home was tied to physical objects, specifically the pearl. For him, the pearl wasn't just a valuable item, it symbolized the life he and his partners once had. His willingness to betray his partners for the pearl shows how a materialistic view of home can corrupt and isolate someone, blinding him to the importance of relationships. In contrast, Splinter's view of home was more profound and emotional. For him, home was defined by the memories and bonds he shared with his family, the turtles. Even when physically rooted in the sewers, it's the relationships that gave his life meaning. Splinter's reluctance to leave the sewers initially might stem from this deep attachment, but it also reflects his understanding that home is not just about a physical space. When Goldfin attacked, Splinter's defense of his home was not just about protecting a place, but about safeguarding the love and memories that defined it. His actions sharply contrasted with Goldfin's, illustrating how a home based on relationships and shared experiences is ultimately more fulfilling and resilient. The story thus contrasts the emptiness of Goldfin's path with the richness of Splinter's, reinforcing the idea that home is where the heart is. How much of this story actually happened? We know there was a storm, but the framing story leaves us questioning just how much was exaggerated. Given the depth of the themes about the meaning of home, can we really see Raph telling a story like this? Maybe, or maybe not. Was it real? Did any of it happen? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Thanks for watching, see you in the sewers.